Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Um, so first things first is a long time ago, pre-COVID, we talked about adding some fields to vendor maintenance for the managed care regulation requirements where you needed to have certain information available on your website. And so we thought if we started tracking this in vendor maintenance, then you could record all of it and basically we could make a PDF report with all this information on it that you could just attach to your website. And so, we already added website, service area, additional disability accommodations, worker languages, the training and experience areas, and like a notes, because that's where we're going to just do the days and hours of operation. However, we were like just looking over stuff because someone was asking about something specific, and we realized that we don't have anything for accepts new enrollees, and we couldn't find any notes or any information on this. And so we're wondering, we can't remember why we missed it, if should be just something that's like a yes no field where a checkbox would do, if we need a note field, or if anyone has any information can help us and guide us for what we need for this. And maybe it's possible you guys aren't tracking this or are unaware. I don't.
Emily,
Yeah.
I think for us it would be helpful to know, yes, that they're accepting new, but it would be helpful to know if we could put in like how many hours they have or what they're accepting new for.
So maybe a notes field, basically.
Yeah, I think that would be good to have.
Would it need to have some type of prompting, or just having like a memo next to it would be enough?
I think a memo next to it would be enough, but at least somewhere you could put in some type of notes.
Okay. But how we have it mocked right now with just a checkbox, would that be something that's good as long as there's also the note field with it?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's not bad. Does anyone else have any feedback that they wanted to provide about accepts new enrollees? Okay. So we have a couple questions about some of the vendor maintenance reports too, as we're starting to get those going. So we had a original design of the vendor report and vendor rates report. It's basically just exactly what we had before, but with all this extra information that I just mentioned above. And so it's getting a little crowded, but I know you'd rather have the information than not, so that you could potentially use this on your website instead of having to create something else, because it'll be a full list of all your vendors with all that required information that you're supposed to have. And so with that in mind, we're kind of wondering, is there any other uses for the vendor report that we should be considering while we're designing this, other than making sure all that information is on there? Because otherwise we're just basically going to have info overload for each vendor, and it's going to be a vendor list. And so if there's any extra information or reasons of why you would use that, we'd love to know. This is a report that's in MySys vendor maintenance right now, and it's just a list of vendors and their contact information and, basic information like address, etc.
Would it be possible in this report, sorry, would it be possible for a report, and maybe it is now and I just don't remember, to have one that includes rates and one that does not, because we don't want to put our rates out on our website.
Yes, that's how it is now.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the vendor report and then the vendor rates report. And so both of them, we were going to basically recreate what we had before, but the difference is the vendor report, we were going to add all that all the extra fields that we just didn't even track before, so that you could potentially use it to post on your website as your list of vendors with, hey, here's their website, here's their ADA compliance, whatever, all that information. And we didn't know if there's any basically other uses that you're using those existing reports right now for, that we should consider to make sure the design is comprehensive. And it sounds like not. Okay, so what about the hold payment and probation options? I was assuming that we wouldn't want to have those on there, because then that's information the vendors could access on your website and see. But I didn't know if that's something that you do want them to see in this list of vendors. Those are the new checkbox fields that were requested to denote if a vendor's, on probation or you're holding out on their payments for whatever reason.
Emily, this is Stacy from Senior Resources. It seems like we may want information as far as probation available if we're gonna have this report be more for the use by the supports coordinators. We'd want to know if they were on probation or if they're accepting new enrollees.
Do you think that would want to be a separate report though? Or would you want that lumped in with the vendor report?
Well, the way that we would use the information, it seems like, is we would probably try to eliminate some existing double entry that we're doing into a database. So we'd want to have a view of the report, I guess, that could be more for internal staff, and then maybe a different view for things like people putting on their websites, things like that.
So I'm thinking then we wouldn't want it on, because if we leave the vendor report as the kind of happy, clean version of the list of vendors with all the managed care regulation information that would go potentially on your website, then we'd probably want something separate that could be more the internal report that includes that stuff you don't really want, you don't want to post. And so is that just probation and accepting new enrollees, or is there kind of a lot more to that you'd want to think about and add?
If we could add a few more things, that would be great. Maybe some things like who's the billing contact person. I think there was something up there about the referral contact. I don't know if you have that showing on the report you're discussing. Those kind of things.
Okay, so I think that what I'm hearing is we'll maybe want to do some type of design for a separate report with maybe even whole payment included too. But if we want the billing contact, acceptance, that all feels like a different grouping of information than just the vendor report that's going to have all the basic contact info and the other stuff that's basically in vendor maintenance. Are there any other uses for the vendor rate support that we should be considering too? So that's not the exact same, but very similar to the report, a little less information, but goes and lists all the rates as well. So more information in that way, but less of the kind of identifying info for a vendor.
is there an upper limit? This is John with Region 4. Is there an upper limit for the vendor contacts?
No. You can add as many contacts now in the system as you want. Like it's not like in vendor maintenance, there was just one spot for one contact right now, but in vendor view. But now we'll have a whole separate tab for adding contacts, and so you can add as many as you want. But if we were, I guess, wanting to put that on the report, we can either do one or we could do multiple. That's up to how you want to do it. Like if right now you could mark several people the referral contact or several people the director, CEO, even though there may only be one, but we're not stopping you. And so I guess we'd want to know if you only want one, then we would change that. But if you want it to be multiple, we can do that too.
No, I like multiple. Is it possible to have to add address information where the CEO might be located elsewhere to where, or rather, and then our billing and actual our billing contacts might be in another location? Is there a possibility to add that within the contacts?
Yeah, so just curious, what's the purpose of knowing that? Just so we understand better.
So one advantage for that might be I do the auditing, the billing audits, and we often have in place in MISIS, we have the corporate address for the address listed there. The problem being that, like with some services, they're not actually based in Michigan, but our local contact is a St. Joseph address. And so we need to, we'd have to go find that second address there. And so that's what would be advantageous for that, is that I could look for their, an alternate address within the contacts.
Rather than the corporate address that might be listed in the vendor.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, we can talk about that. I'll ask Mel. Okay, but that's helpful. But not, I guess, related to vendor rates report. Are there any more uses that you're using now for, or what's the main use case to look at your list of vendors and rates? I mean, we're just assuming that it's the SCs so they can look up the cost for the vendors, but we don't know if there's other things that we're kind of not thinking of how you might want to use it. Maybe you're not doing it now, but would like to, that we could, keep in mind for design while we're doing it, refreshing everything.
This is Kay. Basically, the rate information is specific to my support coordinators. They need that information for setting services.
So pretty like how it's working now it's just fine.
I would think so, yes.
So we were talking about adding possibly these contacts to maybe a whole payment and probation report that would be separate, because it seems like a little bit of a separate scenario that you're looking at versus just the vendor rates report. Would that information also be helpful on the vendor rates report, doing any of these contacts, or do you think you would need to be looking that up on a kind of more one-by-one specific basis, where it would just kind of clutter the report? Because this would be like if we said, oh, we're always going to include the referral contact, then if there's one or there's multiple and it doesn't really apply, it's it's going to be there every time.
Emily, this is Cindy Cole from Region 8. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I'm wondering, with all of the things that we're kind of talking about, like probation, whole payment, accepting new enrollees, and some of the addresses, I just want to throw out an idea and see if we can build upon it, or for CIM to say, well, we can't do that. In the reports portal today, when we go in to select certain reports, I'll use the example of the expenditure report, and where we have the opportunity to say include or exclude T 2022 as an example. I'm wondering if we could talk about potentially include or exclude probation or hold payments, accepting new enrollees, some of these things that we're talking about, so that we don't have to we don't have to have you create as many different types of reports, that we can just kind of control it within the parameters that we set up.
So this is
Yeah.
Jackie. Sorry, this is Jackie. So doing that, excluding those would exclude those vendors that are marked hold for payment or not accepting. If we set it up just like the expenditure reports.
She's saying like they're filters then in that sense versus they
Versus don't show these columns.
yeah. Just design wise and like how we have to code things, they would end up, you would look like you're looking at one report, but you still have to write as many reports as are different views of the data, just because that's how it works. But I mean, that's a great idea. I always appreciate stuff like that. But adding I mean, and maybe it's just a script too, but I don't think doing a simple, pretty straightforward report of, hey, here's the list of vendors who are on probation or accepting newer, whatever they need to be. And I think we're probably going to want to have a small separate design group, because I don't think this is the best space to try to decide exactly what should be on those reports, because it would be new. But we just kind of wanted to get a feel from some of the.
Yeah, we have to get another.
So, okay, well, that's foot in the water. The code description.
Emily, could I bring another item to the table about hold payment,
Yes.
which is really not asking for a report, but the reason I was a proponent of bringing this as a checkbox would be to assist our billers when they're in vendor billing, to not process batches that we've been asked by other members in our organization to hold payments. So I'm going to throw out a suggestion. Is there a way on today in the vendor billing, when we have the, I'm going to say pending review screen, and there it shows all the batches and multiple pages of those batches that are in the hopper for us to review, would there be a way for you to add, I don't know, a column that says hold payment, or a way to identify those batches or those vendors, I should say, that we should be holding payment on, so that our billers could just not do them until that checkbox is
Yeah, we could
unchecked?
kind of like flag. Would it be something that you would want to be able to still go through if it's there, or if it be a hard stop if it's flagged that that they're hold payment? Because we could do it where it's just like a flag and it's a warning, but you could still post, if you wanted to, versus, or, oh, hey, this vendor is marked this, you can't send, or, I mean.
I
Would
guess
you-
I would say if the whole payment box is checked, I would just not want the billers to be able to do anything. They should be contacting our contracts department if there's some reason that someone's asking for us to move forward with payment.
Okay.
That's me.
We could basically just stop you from being able to approve them.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then to further that, today in the system, when there are multiple batches that are submitted to us, we have no easy way of knowing what months they belong to. I mean, sometimes we have to just go back and click, 10 months before we find the second batch that they've submitted. Is there some way that you could identify, the batch, honestly, the batch number and the month, in the pending review screen?
Yeah. I think, without looking, I don't know, but Jackie, maybe you can check, the pending review. We have a mock-up in KBase if you want to look. We might have already added month because I think Melissa pointed out that same thing that why don't we have this? This is silly. So that would,
I think so too. I'm looking now.
Cindy, is just as long as when you're looking at the list of pending batches for review, if month is just a column, is that all you're asking for?
Yes,
Great.
because
Okay.
then
We have
that would assist our billers in knowing, okay, we just have to go back to May of 2021 without, we can just go to it instead of looking month by month. Where is this batch we need to review?
Yeah.
So we
Thank
do
you.
have a column for batch month year.
Okay. Because I think what we think we changed is the pending is just going to be everything for your agency, not specific to month, not specific to vendor. And so that's where you can go to really see, hey, what do I have left to do? And so I think that that's going to hit what you're hoping it does.
Thank you.
Sorry, before I move on to code description reports, does anyone else have anything more on hold payment and probation or the vendor report or vendor rates report? Okay.
Emily?
Yep.
Vanessa has a question. Would we still be able to open the batch and review the participants they are billing for which the whole payment selection? So where Cindy suggested that we just stop everything from being approved. Vanessa wants to know if we can still open and view the participants.
Yeah, I think we would just, everything would work the same. Basically, like where you can view, look, all things that we basically planned would be the same, except we'd probably show a flag. And this, conversation is more like, oh, what do you need? We'll mock something up and we'll go over it in a future design call to make sure, that we have a solid plan. But I'm thinking is a flag that shows somewhere in the UI. And then if an agent tries to go and add approved values and then click save, we're going to show some error probably that says, hey, you can't approve this right now because this vendor has a hold payment flagged. That's my shooting from the hip. But we'll mock something up and kind of come up with a more detailed plan and probably include that in the next call, so that you guys have a chance to look and approve and make sure that we're all on the same page. Is that clear that up? Oh, she was a message person, so hopefully she can send another message if we have any more questions. So, service code combination report is just going to be based on the national code list and include procedure, modifier, and standard remark codes. And we've been calling it the code combo or service code combo, and all these different little short names. And it's just meaning, what are all? Hey, here's my list of all the possible code combinations that can go together. And so, if Melissa wrote this example, for instance, if you have H 2015, that can exist on its own without standard marks. But also there'll be two more records to include a standard remark combination where it's H 2015 and it's standard remark for transportation or not. And then whatever date ranges those codes basically apply to. And so that's not something that, we're creating. We're just basing it off of the national code list. We're just, making sure that the system can point to that and see, oh, hey, when I'm setting up my rates, I can only add rate or service combinations in your rates that are truly possible versus letting it be helter-skelter and being able to add any procedure with any modifier or any procedure with any standard remark. So that's what that is. And so the service code combo report is a list of all of those service combos that are possible. And we figured that would just be kind of helpful to look at when you're trying to add vendor rates to see what, what really is still legit, what's been discontinued, and, if there's any combos that aren't valid anymore, that that kind of sets that straight. So that's the service code combo report. Then there's also, oh, go ahead.
This is Cindy. So with the service code combinations, are you saying that everything that's available in the National Register is available to us, or is there going to be a filter about what's in attachment G for the My Choice Waiver program? So that we would only have those items that are available. I know all of us might do other things related to other programs, but I'm trying to get a sense of, is truly everything that's available in the HCPCS code registry available to us? Because if the answer is yes, I would like us to think about finding the code or getting some direction about what code we might be able to use for the direct care worker premium pay amount that couldn't be included when the pandemic first started.
I don't know the answer, honestly. I'll have to ask. Melissa will definitely know. If she doesn't, we'll figure it out. And so,
right. I just wanted to put it out there so you could have that discussion behind the scenes.
yep, yeah,
Thanks.
I'll get back to you on that. Thanks, Cindy. So, is there any other questions on the service code combo or comments? So the FundSource service code combo is almost identical with the addition of FundSource with the service code combo. And so this will just make it so that you can set which fund sources can be used with which services. And so that just, for instance, FundSource 100 would have different codes that you could use than FundSource 102. And oh, here it says many codes not specific to My Choice, CTS, TCM, or MHL will simply allow any service code combination. So it just, the fund sources that are a lot broader there's just, they'll be, it's more, I say fund sources that are a lot broader, but you actually pick your service code first, and then we kind of filter the list of fund sources of what still applies. And some of those, I guess, will be included often.
Hey, Emily, this is John with Region 4. What about fund sources that are relative to, say, the participant's age, where that might be would that be something that could get worked in? Where, like, for clients 60 and over, they would get, I think, 202. And then for others, we have an alternate code. I don't know if that's standardized for all area agencies, but is that something that's possible?
I don't know. So right now it's just date and service combo of how it filters. And I don't know if we could also look at, I'm just trying to think, because basically if it could filter by, hey, here's 202 and the alternate codes, those would already be showing. And then if we also looked at the participant age, we might be able to. I'm writing that down to ask Melissa about in our developers.
Hey, John, could
Yes.
you also send us information about how the age works with the fund sources? I don't think we know anything about that.
Yeah, I'm not the best one for that, but I will find the best person to share that information with you. But I'll get that to you.
Thank you
And
very much.
that was Jackie that asked for that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
Also, Go, Jackie.
Sorry, Andrea is asking, will the system block Fund 100 from being used with non-waiver services? I believe that is the plan. So we would stop a lot of the claims rejections, eligibility rejection. Well, yeah, rejections
I think
at
that's
the front end.
the main reason that we're doing this, actually, one of the main use cases. Also, so John, can you send that to, well, just Jackie, Mel, and me? And then if this isn't a standard thing that could be applied to everyone, I don't think we would want to do that. So I don't know if anyone else can speak to what he was asking about, because I think this, we would do something that would affect everybody.
This is Cindy. I would agree with John that we would like to pursue it because I know we have programs where participants need to be at least age 60 to utilize the services. And one of them is the Older Americans Act funding program. So I think a lot of us could benefit from it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, John and Cindy. Okay, so the questions about these reports were basically just coming down to the filters. So Melissa was wondering, well, we all are, she's the one that put this little part together, if we still need an all option. So if not, we were going to do that where I have the mock-up and it says active fiscal year 2022. So that would be the default option, but then we'd also have the current fiscal, that is the current fiscal year, and the prior fiscal year in the drop down. And so we could have those options all for the active service combo or active fund source service combo, and then get rid of the all filter, just because that would save us some effort. But if that's needed, it's not a big deal either. We just didn't know if that was really going to be useful to see all from the end of time.
Okay. This is Cindy. I don't think it would be useful. Here's my comment. If we needed to, for some bizarre audit reason, needed to get some sort of information, we could always ask CIM to run a report for us.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that feels like the best of both worlds, so you can eliminate that, because honestly, when I think about everything that report would return to us, I don't know how I'd look at it and function.
That's why we're like, we just don't know where that would come in handy.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get rid of, okay, good. We just want to get rid of some of the stuff that's never being run. So, okay, that's good. And then what else do we have here? Oh, wondering if instead of just doing all fund sources, which would give you every single combination for all fund sources, if you wanted to do filtering it by fund source, so you could just say, whatever, like, show me all the possible combinations for fund source 100 or 102 and etc. So would that be better to do it one at a time, or no? Because then you wouldn't be able to see multiple. Like I think this is kind of one or the other.
That's how I would review it, is by fund source at a time, so I could find the things that shouldn't be there. So if I did everything, it would be more difficult, I would think. So I'm suggesting we could eliminate the all there as well.
Thanks, Cindy.
You're welcome.
Does anyone disagree? Okay. If you think about it later and you want to email us, that's fine too. Okay, and so another thing we wanted to go over is we're wondering if we don't need the not code combinations, the individual reports for procedure, modifier, and standard remark. We had lists previously that just list them all, but now that we're doing the code combo instead, where you'll be able to just see them where they apply, we're just thinking, you know, what use would it be to have a list report of every procedure and every modifier and every standard remark individually? Just not sure that there's really a good use for that, but if there is, we want to know about that. Gonna take the silence as no, you don't need individual reports for these.
I'm going to say yes, as conceptually as I can see it.
Thanks. Oh, and then we also are talking about changing from having just the active filter and getting rid of all. We're wondering if we can do that as well for the vendor and vendor rates reports and just do current as of today's date. And then we can also have the option to run by this in prior fiscal years as well and get rid of the date range filter. And so it would just be either current as of today's date and the option to run this in prior fiscal year. And then that would be it. And there would be no all filter with the date range that's mocked up, because we get rid of the all that can pull anything that was ever in the system, unless that's still going to be needed to some reason look far back.
I'm still thinking what I said earlier is, you know, I agree that you could eliminate that above. And so if for some unforeseen reason none of us can think of right now that we needed something older than 2 years ago, we could ask you to run that for, but I can't even fathom what that would be.
Yeah, right. Because you would still be able to see these vendors in your system too. And so,
yep.
Yeah, but we could always look.
Emily, this is Andrea, Region 6. I'm a little lost at where we're running these reports from. Is this from the vendor billing or is this from the expenditure tab?
This is
or MISIS vendor table? I'm not sure.
Sorry, yep. So this is in vendor maintenance. Right now it's in MISIS under the vendor maintenance little menu, but we're moving it into Compass. And so we've got basically, if you go back to the second page, you can just see the tab and kind of have a little context of where we're at. So the vendor maintenance modules where we're in, that picture on the second page is showing the contacts tab. But if you look one to the right, there's the reports and reports download. We went over these like super long ago, so it's not weird that you don't know where we are right now. But there's just those reports tabs, and that's where you would be able to, oh, I even have a screenshot on page 3. I don't know why I didn't mention that. Whoopsie. And there's all these different reports that we have in there, like the vendor report, the vendor rates report, your active users list, and yada, yada. Like, and so we're going over a couple of the specific ones in that list and what parameters you basically need to run them. And because we're just thinking that the really old data is just never going to be pulled. And we don't really want to give those options for running all that can pull a lot of resources and grab a lot of data that just gives you this big report full of information that kind of isn't super helpful. So that's kind of what we're talking about.
Got it. Sorry for
No.
So we would still be able to run expenditures using any or all, or if we chose like date ranges and things like that. Okay.
Yeah, this isn't affecting that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Well, I feel like it sounds like we're okay to continue with just current for now. If for some reason something does come up, let us know. But like Cindy said, we'd be able to pull that information for you guys if you needed. And these vendors aren't going to be just appearing out of your system. You'll still be able to see them in the list and search for them for any information. It just wouldn't be, you wouldn't be able to pull a report that just lists active vendors during that time period. So I don't think this has a lot of use to have the all.
Emily?
Yes.
So we'd still have the view to all of this information, just like under the vendor maintenance tab by going into that individual vendor,
Yep. Yeah.
their record. Okay.
Yeah. That's why we're like, I mean, how is it helpful to, go search through super long ago and see them in a list instead.
Right. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'm going to move on to billing. Okay. So last call we talked about possibly removing the care setting status column and doing invoice number there instead, but we decided that you guys said you prefer to keep care setting status in there over invoice number. So we made a new mock-up. Jackie had a good idea to use icons to kind of help save a little space. And so that's what we have above to show you. Is a little house icon would be when they're home, and the X when they're not home. And then if you hover over it, you'll be able to see where they are. And we also think we're planning on still doing the little pop-up that when you come in to a specific bill where it has a person that wasn't at home, we'll do a pop-up so that it's even another chance for you not to miss that they weren't at home. So that's the plan with that. And then we also decided, since invoice number doesn't have a column in here, and we talked about just using mass edit to change it, that we wanted to still somehow make it visible. And so on hover of batch ID, we're going to show invoice number and sent date so that you can still find that information in here. And so I just noted that when agencies post bills for their vendors, instead of the vendors posting them, they're not going to need to send them in because you'd be sending them to yourself. And so there's no purpose, no reason to batch them up, because they're just, the purpose of batching is so you can batch it up for your review. But when you post bills for your vendors, you'll post and approve, so review at the same time. And so we wouldn't have batch ID in those columns for if you've posted and approved. And so if you want to see the invoice number after assigning it later on in the in the future, like if you're looking under the all filter and you're looking at this view of the data and you're like, well, how am I going to see invoice number if there's no batch ID to hover over? If you still hover over that column, you'll be able to see that information even if there isn't a batch ID there and there is an invoice number. So that's kind of complicated, but just was going to try to explain that in case there are any concerns or worries without having a batch ID.
Hey, Emily, this is Cindy. I've got a question.
Yes.
So today, when we process, I'm going to say multiple batches for the same vendor, and we want to pull an expenditure report out of Compass. I don't even know if I can explain this. Sometimes, we do have problems with getting the right expenditure report with the filters that exist. If we use they were both made batches as an example, and we processed both of them on today's date. Historically, we can't get the right expenditure report that would show us the information that's included in each separate batch. So I'm a little concerned with the fact that if we don't have a batch number, even for these things that we do ourselves, and we identify an invoice number, and because it's not automatic for us, I'm just wondering if we use the same invoice number on the same day for the same provider ID, if we're going to have issues getting the correct batch, the expenditure report that we would desire. Does that make sense? Because I know I'm fumbling a little bit.
Yes, sort of. Well, so, but what I'm hearing is you're right now, I'm sorry, I'm not super familiar with the expenditure reports, but are you saying that you're using invoice number to try to see what you want to see now, and it's already not really always showing what you're expecting?
Correct. Yes.
So we're hoping that maybe we could change something to use batch ID since it's system, whatever you assigned, versus invoice number in the future. And so then not having batch ID would not allow us to make that change. Is that what you're asking then?
I'm hoping that the batch ID could just continue to be auto-generated regardless, because we find that of benefit to us, so that we don't have to track things. I mean, the auto-generation is just great for us, regardless of who initiates the batch.
Are you, sorry, I'm just trying to understand how the batch ID will help with this, seeing the correct expenditure report that you're looking at. Is it because you're using the batch ID for the invoice number as well when you're assigning invoice number?
You know what I'm going to do, Emily, is I'm going to find an example for you and send it to you. Because I feel like it's almost beyond my comprehension to talk about. It happens kind of frequently for us. What we do right now is we don't post more than one batch from a provider on a given day, because we have difficulty. And I'm just trying to, like, my head is exploding because I've been on this call like almost an hour. So it's like I want to find an example and bring it back. You can debunk my comments offline, and we can either bring it up in a future call, or it doesn't need to be. Does
Okay.
that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds great.
This is
Okay, thanks.
this is Terry. Can I add to this conversation?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, so we love the batch number. I think that's I utilize it a lot, especially when I'm doing queries to look for stuff. And when I do my premium pay adjustments, I do it by batch number, because we also use the batch number as the invoice ID, which we started using probably that batch number in October as an invoice. And except for those that we post directly into MySees, we do create our own invoice number, but the invoice number is the same, and we treat it kind of like a batch. So if we have one provider and they have 20 bills, all of those bills have the same invoice number. And we've been very consistent, and we've had no issues with generating expenditure reports based on that invoice number or batch number. So I don't know, I use the batch number a lot. And also when I'm communicating with providers, I always tell them as well, like if there's an issue, we use that batch number as an identifier, so we know, because they have it too. So we definitely use that batch number.
So let me just clarify just really quick before we do any more questions. So the batch number isn't going away. Whenever vendors post bills and send them to you, they'll always still, come in a batch, have a batch ID, and you can still, assign that same invoice number or use the batch ID as the invoice number. But when you said when you're kind of doing something similar, where you're trying to use that same invoice number on 20 bills when you're entering them in MySys, that's the part that we're talking about. So these would be the bills that you're entering for your vendors, and approving them at the same time. And so you would still be able to enter the same invoice number for all of them. There's just no batch ID that's generated that's telling you, hey, here's a number to use, because each of them are, and if we did auto-generate one, the only problem is they'd all have to be individual for each bill. And so you wouldn't really end up batching anything, if that makes sense.
So if we enter directly into this new system instead of MySees, it will not have a batch number, you're saying?
Well, we can, no, like this is a good conversation. I just wanted to talk about the difference between you posting versus the vendor posting, because it's confusing. But So they'll always auto generate for vendors because as soon as they sent, they post all their, for whatever, however many participants for the month, when they click send, the system will still auto generate and create a batch ID for all those bills. And that's what you'll see when you're viewing. But if you're going in and you're posting as an agent user, and so you're posting and approving at the same time, there's no send process. You're just
Oh, okay.
doing it right then and there. So then you can assign an invoice number and keep using that as you keep going through whatever those bills are. So like, does that, you know what I mean? Like, there's a difference.
Yeah, I understand that. Totally makes sense. But what you were saying, and I just want to clarify, if you were to keep when we were posting as an agency or as a waiver agency, and if you were to have a batch number associated with that, it would have to be for each individual bill, and it couldn't be as a batch.
Yeah, because we have no way of knowing what bills you want to, review or post and approve associated with that. That was why this came. We were like, oh, well, might as well not even do a batch ID because you would be doing each one individually unless there's, I don't know any other way.
So Emily, as I've been listening to this discussion, this is Cindy, our issue has come historically when we do an edit on the same day we've done a batch for the same provider. And, again, part of it is probably because the edit's done in MISIS and the batch is done in vendor billing. So I don't understand how this is going to cross over when we have our discussion about, bill editing and reclaims and all of that. But right now today, if we process batch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for vendor ABC company, and we print all the reports and, we do this reviewer check and we go, oh, there was a wrong cost on one of the, I'll say, service plan lines in the new world, and we go to make a correction, we can't isolate those transactions into two separate expenditure reports. And that's concerning for us today. And so I'm putting out there that I'm hoping that as we go through this discussion and programming is done, that we are able to run an expenditure report for a task waiver agents decide that we want to be isolated. And so it feels like to me that isolation would occur around a batch ID number, whether it was initially submitted by the provider or it was initiated by the waiver agency. Does that make sense?
I think so. When you were talking about your edits, I mean, that's a possibility of being an edit on one that you've entered or an edit on one that they've sent in, and you want to see those individually, right?
Correct.
Or
For purposes of an audit trail, I really want to see everything isolated in a way that people can't, when you get down to reclaiming, I want to hear what other people's ideas are, but my big concerns will always be the audit trail and the fact that we have to have something very robust that stops things from being changed at a given point in time so that we can show auditors that the batch that was submitted is what we paid, that we authorized or we denied, as opposed to something changing midstream that would make it difficult for any agency here on this call to show what originally actually happened.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, when we talk about reports, that's where I get a little like, oof, this is above my pay grade, where I don't know exactly how they are running now to know what we can do in the future. But as far as like tracking all these changes and when they happen and what can happen, we definitely will have that locked down and have audits where, regardless if there was batch ID or not, which we can auto generate a batch ID for each bill that you post and approve. That's not going to be a problem. It's just we didn't know that it would be helpful because of the difference in, I guess, functionality. But we can talk more about that. But we won't ever not have an audit or not be able to stop changes at a certain point when they're not supposed to be happening, i.e. after they're verified or, whatever. So for that fear, don't worry, I guess.
Yeah. So Cindy, sorry, this is Terry, Cindy. I get what you're saying totally, where you have to have that audit trail. So internally here, what we've been doing is, because when you edit a bill, you can also edit the invoice number. We just put an R at the end of it, so like a revision. And that's helped us identify which ones were original and which one were revisions for those that we've assigned our own invoice number on.
So we've tried to do things like that, but when we go to, isolate it to print an expenditure report, we're not always successful. We can't, and I can't explain to you why that occurs or doesn't occur. But when we try to run an expenditure report and isolate it by a different type of invoice number, if they're done on the same day, it's random for us right now whether we can get the report that we think we should be able to. That's all I'm saying.
This is Stacy from Senior Resources, and I agree with Cindy. We run into the same issue sometimes, and it shows correctly. We're able to use filters within MISIS for the bill post report, and I'm able to get the totals that I'm looking for and look at that detail to ensure that. And then when I go to pull the same information with the filters available in Compass expenditure reports, that expenditure total does not match. I think some of that may be coming from user ID. We don't have that filter in expenditure report. And I know, like for our agency, we have multiple staff that are processing billings. So it may be one staff that was working on the original bill that came through, and then another staff that created audits.
Oh, interesting. Well,
Thanks, Stacy.
I'm glad we're recording this so I can talk with Mel, and she's, back from vacation. But if you don't mind, if you could still try to send an email detailing the kind of example you're trying to discuss but can't quite explain why, that would still be really helpful, Cindy.
I will find you an example because I know, I'm pretty sure I had one within the last month, and my staff remembers how painful they are because, we have parameters in places like don't do this if A happens B until tomorrow. So I'll get you something.
I believe you. I mean, and so I want to understand so we can try to figure that out. Okay. So, geez, I don't even know how to sum up because it feels like we're going to need to just maybe review that and then have another conversation about batch ID for agent posted bills. That's what I'm thinking. Okay. So the other thing that's changed in this mock-up too is there's a more column. We'll get to that a little bit later as to the one functionality we have planned for it. Otherwise, there's really nothing that we have planned in that. We just kind of want to name it something generic so that if something does come up where there's a new process that we need, blah, 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 that it always happens. We kind of want to have that flexibility there where we could just add to the more basically drop down menu. So that's what more is not really more, but we'll get to the one functionality we have planned for that. So bill reclaim. This has been on the past couple agendas and we have never gotten to it. So I kind of want to get more conversations flowing about this as we're kind of talking about similar things. So bill reclaim, the idea here is just vendors would basically be able to grab back bills that you haven't approved yet. So if they are posting all their bills, they send a batch, realize they made a mistake, and instead of having to do communicating it with you, and maybe it's too late, you've approved it, now you have to do an edit, or or you just have to have some discrepancy where you're like, this is not correct. Now you're going back and forth. If this would be a process that would kind of help mitigate some of those issues by allowing them to select a bill. Well, you'd select the whole batch, I think is what we talked about. And then you would click this reclaim button and it would remove the participant service month from the batch. Sorry, not the whole batch, the whole participant service month, not a specific bill. Sorry. And then that would have to be resubmitted again after whatever changes have been made. And so if an agent somehow at the same time had that same exact participant pulled up and was going through and approving and a vendor claimed it, then we just throw an error that says, hey, you guys are doing this at the same time, and we would allow the vendor would get the priority to make the changes and have to resubmit it. And so it's truly just pulling something out of a batch. It would be assigned then with whatever new batch ID when they resend the changes. And so wondering if this would be a feature that you'd want to give vendors so they can fix their mistakes, if that's going to actually save a lot of time, or if there's any issues that we're not really thinking about and want to talk about now.
So Emily, here's my question about the audit concern that I had previously. So if I just give an example where the provider submitted a batch and they were asking for reimbursement for $1,000, and we had this reclaim button, and so they pulled back a participant, and while my staff was in the batch, and they pulled back a service plan that amounted for $100. What sort of reports am I and the vendor going to be able to generate to see this? Is that we would only see something for $900 because that 100 had been pulled? What if the provider has already pulled some sort of report that verifies that they've submitted it and they've submitted $1,000, but because they have this reclaim button available to them, they're only going to see that $900 could possibly be submitted to them. I'm trying to visualize what that audit trail becomes between the provider and ourselves.
That's a good question, because I do think we were thinking of the reports running as is. So like how you said, you'd see the $900 report, but if I don't know the answer. I can't answer that with 100% certainty.
I mean, and I get it. That's just why we're talking about these things, because the audit is really it's critical. And so it sounds great in theory to reduce the number of actual edits that we have to do, but I'm a little scared. So,
well, that's exactly the kind of stuff we want to know about, so that then at least we can take this back. And these things are so complicated, it's kind of hard to answer on the fly regardless. And so at least we can consider this and see if we do have an answer that checks all the boxes. And if it doesn't, then that's, one big reason not to do this.
This is Andrea from Region 6. I believe it would be beneficial if it were, in fact, the provider submitted their bills, realized there was an error before we started to approve them, to be able to fix those errors and resubmit. Obviously, if we've already started approving, then wouldn't they or we get the notice that someone was trying to adjust that bill. Is that correct?
If you, so you have to approve an entire month for one participant at once. And so if you've already done that and saved it, they can't reclaim it. But if you are in the middle, you haven't saved your changes yet, then we would get the error that says, hey, a vendor just tried to pull this bill back. You can no longer, approve it.
Right. So as long as we haven't approved it, there shouldn't really be a cause for, I would think, I can't think of what she said, the problem with auditing, because we haven't approved anything, we haven't paid anything. They want to fix it prior to us approving and paying.
Yeah, I guess that's true for reports. It's not like whatever reports they can run aren't going to show that they're approved. So that's not.
I think what Andrea is saying, and I agree with what I believe I heard her say. So I'm just gonna restate it and have Andrea weigh in. I think in our world, many of our providers submit batches to us on the first day of the month. Okay, so all of a sudden we have 10 pages in our pending review file, vendor billing file. And we're certainly not going to get to all of those on the first day or even the second day, third, fourth. So I think the bill reclaim feature could work for us as long as the agent hasn't opened the batch at all. Once it's opened, I think the reclaim option should not be available to the provider. And I think there's, certainly a few days, depending upon the day of the month or the time of the month, or, just staff being on vacation, we don't get to things as quickly. I just think I don't feel comfortable right now without there being more research done by CIM to say, what do those reports look like for either side of us once a reclaim is being attempted while we're in the batch? Andrea, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I would agree with that as well. If we've already started processing a batch and they found an error, maybe it would just be a communication, and somehow, I don't know if there could be a report pulled at that time of what we've already processed. I mean, for us, I would definitely prefer to have a bill edited by the provider and fixed before we pay it, because it's a heck of a lot easier than going back and editing units and funds and, doing adjustments in our finance system. So I definitely think at the point of where we're starting to process something, there should be something in place where we could, either block them or have a discussion on what would happen next. I agree with that.
This is Jackie. Are you guys pulling a batch report and then using that as your base when you approve the bills? Is that
No, we're just
where
looking
the
at
issue
the
is?
screen.
I'm sorry, Cindy, what was that?
We don't run a report to either approve or deny units that are being requested for reimbursement. We're just looking at the screen, and we start with the first participant on the search, and start there. So to me, it's once we open that batch to begin the review process, that reclaim button should no longer be available to the provider. That's in my mind right now with what I'm reading or what I've seen as pictures, is what it would need for me to be robust enough for my audit trail that I need to have, and that the provider needs to have as well.
Okay.
This is John with Region 4. I really like the idea of the bill claim, and I am on board with what Cindy was saying about once we begin processing it, that they shouldn't be able to reclaim anything. I might also, though, like one thing I could see as advantageous would be to add a review the batch, which would give us an opportunity just to look through it without actually changing the reclaim status on the vendor side. One possibility for that would be like if we were had to do some corrective training with the vendor about how they submitted it, we could our staff could enter this review batch review, which would allow us to to look through and discuss these pieces without actually changing the status. That way the vendor could go back and do the reclaim as we've instructed, and we wouldn't have to do any type of editing on our end. So I'd like the reclaim. I'd also like to see a review that doesn't affect the vendor's ability to reclaim.
Oh,
This is 7.
Wait.
Go ahead.
sorry, is it more on that? Because I have a question about that first. If not, okay, so just John, would the review, couldn't it just be you looking at it and not actually approving it? I'm
So
confused what the review does.
So I would say that in my mind, if I'm opening a batch, 9 times out of 10, if I'm opening a batch, I'm going to be doing approving, and I believe that 9 times out of 10 that should change the status. They should no longer be able to do a bill claim.
Right.
But there could be a time where a vendor has a question where they want to discuss it with some of our billing staff to see if in fact they did it correctly. If our billing staff then identified an issue, if we didn't have this review button, we'd have to, our data staff would have to just, zero things out and, just deny it. A review button gives us the opportunity to discuss it with the vendor without it, and then the vendor can then reclaim the bill from there.
Well, I'm wondering, like, it sounds like in that situation, they're needing to communicate that to you through what? Through the notes or through a message? Any of your message? Like, how are you knowing that you need to do this review with them?
They'll contact us in whatever way is efficient or necessary for them. Like, it could be, we had one vendor where we were doing we had a corrective action plan in which we were auditing their, each month's submission for a period of time. And, where I might not be doing the approving of the actual bill, I would go through I could review it and just say, okay, this looks like it's in line. This looks like it's in line. Oh, this is missing some stuff here. But then if I needed to discuss it with the vendor, it would still give me that opportunity to not take the ability to reclaim away if they were under, this, review a corrective action plan period.
And like, if they're contacting you, you could just go and look at the same thing that they're looking at, because now you guys will be literally always looking at the same views, essentially, because it would be a not posted, and you could kind of have that same conversation of, oh, I can see what you've got here. Like, this is where you're going wrong. And then they wouldn't even need to reclaim it at that point, because they could just not send it unless you still want them. And maybe since we're hearing some positive things about reclaim, just we need barriers on reclaim. It could still be a part of that process where they're contacting you. They have already sent it as a part of a batch, but they can reclaim it and, start making those changes. But I'm not seeing what the review like a buttoned or status would add, because if they're just contacting you in whatever way, you can see that stuff at any point. Because I'm thinking what you guys are saying is if you want to stop them from being able to reclaim any bill in a batch as soon as you started reviewing any other bill in that batch, then that whole per bill thing doesn't work, like we were saying. Because we were thinking it's like, oh, if you haven't approved this specific participant service month within the batch, then it can be reclaimed. But I'm hearing different is as soon as I've opened and started approving any bill in that same batch, then you don't want them to.
I was under the misunderstanding. I did think it was I'm for they can reclaim it as long as the batch hasn't been modified. If the batch has been modified or opened, I would not be for a bill reclaim.
I agree with that.
Okay. That's That's what I'm hearing. And so I'm just saying, John, then that's why you want the review, because now, okay, because if as soon as you start doing something else in a batch, you want to still be able to mark that one specific bill as allowed to be pulled out.
Right, right.
Okay.
Because it also might be possible that with our notice of non-service process, that one of my data staff might pull me into, you know, a notice of non-service review, and so I want to go back and look at and affects, you know, current billing. That I don't want to go into the approved process to view it. I want to go into this review status to make sure that they didn't do that. Didn't do that which they shouldn't have done or something, and then we can advise them to for data staff to hold off, and then maybe advise the vendor to reclaim that and make the appropriate changes. So that's just one possibility, but that's why I would want a review button. Yeah.
Does anyone else, does that resonate with anybody else where they are going through the same kind of experiences and would enjoy using that?
Emily, I know that staff does have times where they reach out and they've seen something that was incorrect in the initial batch that was submitted. And I like the reclaim idea. My thought is, if a bill is reclaimed, then a new batch ID number is submitted for that reclaim.
That is how we plan to do it. Is
Okay.
what- Yeah.
Okay, because that would be the best audit trail. Is
Okay.
Yes.
That's what we meant when we're saying like reclaim essentially means remove it from the batch, because
Remove one participant from the batch, they fix it, and they resubmit it, but it's now under a new batch ID number.
yep, totally, yeah.
So
Right.
your reports are going to be associated with those separate batches.
Right. I just didn't know. So when Cindy was asking about running reports, basically running one before they reclaim it, which would be unapproved values. So I don't really know that it actually does matter, because if you ran one for the 1,900 example, I just don't know our reports like the back of my hand to know what we have, but like it wouldn't, nothing would be approved. So the reports would show that. Then if you reclaimed 100 of that 1,000 and now you have a 900 report, that's going to be what's approved for that batch and makes sense. And the 100 that comes through the second would also be approved and make sense. Like I do think that this is going to have an audit trail that's safe and sound, but I'm not going to confidently say that now. We'll take this and, look at this definitely more in detail. But it sounds like it could be a positive thing, and that people are agreeing that they do not want to be able to reclaim after any bill in a batch is approved. So
That's correct. I'm a little concerned about, my example in how a provider might run a report. Again, it would be unapproved status of 1,000, and we approve 900. I just can't conceptually. Sometimes the state asks us to submit reports of certain payments to providers, and sometimes providers are asked to submit data to us, and then we in turn submit it to the state. And if the provider has any sort of report anywhere at some point in time that says $1,000 because it existed at the time they submitted it to us, I just wonder about that audit trail. That's all I'm saying. You have to, CIM has to help me feel more comfortable about how that all works between the agencies and the providers.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, it's 11:20. I don't really know if we want to get into talking about bill edits, because I can see that being a potentially lengthy conversation. What do you think, Jackie? Do we want to go on, or is everyone kind of brain dead at this point?
We should probably hold off, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is good because there's a lot to talk about with the stuff we've already gone over. And so maybe when we hopefully get to Bill Edit's next call, we can re-go over a lot of this stuff we talked about today after having a chance to internally discuss, and also kind of get those specific examples from you guys. So I think that seems like a good plan.
Emily, is there a sandbox that we can play in for this? For some of the earlier stuff that we discussed, like the vendor maintenance, we are getting there, yes, but the newer things like billing and service schedule and the vendor view, those are all still in major development. So no to those, but is that more what you're interested in? Yeah, I have some interest in just making sure that the way that we're going through these, we're looking kind of, at each part of the process, but we're not necessarily discussing how earlier processes inform the particular sections that we're working with. So I just want to make sure that, in some of my recommendations, even that the way that the system works is the way that I'm speaking intelligently about the way the system works as to what my expectation is for reports or for later steps. So, like, I'm not confident right now about the calendar and non-services and stuff like that, and whether my recommendations for those, how that plays out in the system, and then also the policy changes that I think that I'm going to have to recommend to the rest of the agency, as well as to retraining vendors as to what our new expectations for service satisfaction might be. And so I just want to be able to play in it.
Yeah. Well,
so I can develop those.
We definitely do not have something like that ready, but maybe we could do something more specific where we have a smaller group to do kind of one-on-one going through. I mean, this has already been a couple of years of the picking up with 4.0. It's probably really hard to keep up with these conversations that we've had 2 years ago and try to, relate them to what we're talking about now. So maybe something smaller where we can one-on-one just video, and we use the app that we can and show what we could to kind of make sure these processes do make sense. We want to have that feedback. So we'll talk internally and see if we can't think of something to help you and others.
All right, thanks a lot.
Yeah. So the other thing that just made me think of is you're the one that brought up the situation of wanting to know how many, for like the weekly dining times, how many units per day, like daily units, and how many occurrences. So that's been brought up to us by a couple other agencies now too. So just wanted you to know that we are trying to figure out something for that, because I know that was one of your concerns.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Yep. All right. Is there any other questions about the stuff we talked about or anything else? Okay. Well, thanks for bearing with me, everybody, and participating. We'll get some information out for next call and hopefully get to Bill Edits. So thanks.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.